Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see that everyone was able to survive the first day of Dreamforce, and I'm glad that you were able to join us this morning. So when Lisa and I decided that we wanted to submit a presentation for Dreamforce, we thought about what's a topic that no one really talks about, and that's data migrations. So I'm glad that you're able to join us this morning. We're going to review the Developer's Guide to Data Migration Tools and Processes. We're going to review some high-level requirements gathering milestones. We're going to review some of the tools that are available to perform data migrations, and then Lisa's going to do a demonstration of a tool that we use to perform the data migrations. And at the end, we're going to give you some high-level takeaways. As you know, Salesforce is a publicly traded company, and as such, you should base any buying decisions on commercially available products.
Hi there, I'm Lisa Hargraves. I'm a senior software engineer for POS Portal ScanSource. I've been working with Salesforce for more than 10 years and at POS Portal for more than 7. My day-to-day activities include designing technical architecture and development solutions for both internal and external clients' functionality requests, as well as implementation of custom complex logic.
And I'm Janet Elliott. I'm a technical program manager at POS Portal. My current role involves technology enablement and project management with regard to Salesforce, as well as special projects from our Solutions Hub. I'm a recent RAD grad, and I'm a Trailblazer community group leader for the Sacramento Women in Tech group. So we work for POS Portal. Its parent company is ScanSource. We are a distributor of point-of-sale hardware and solutions. We utilize Salesforce for our sales, service, e-commerce, and marketing teams, as well as community cloud with our partners and clients. We've also done some Salesforce professional service work for our clients. So Lisa and I have worked together for about 7 years, and in that time, we've done a lot of data migrations. Everything from Excel spreadsheets, proprietary databases, other CRM systems, and from Salesforce.
And things didn't always go smoothly. So with each new data migration, we made a conscious effort to refine our approach and to result in measurable process improvements.
Most important thing.
And the most important thing is don't panic.
So I distinctly remember the first data migration project that I was given at POS Portal. I was new to Salesforce. I was new to the industry, and I didn't have a framework to go from in order to do the requirements gathering. I didn't know what questions to ask, and I didn't know how to document the requirements. Now, I understand this is probably a group of mainly developers, and you may or may not be involved in the requirements gathering process, but I think that it's really important to understand what the important milestones are when you're gathering requirements. So I've come up with 6 requirements gathering milestones that I'd like to review with you. So as any project manager is going to tell you, preparation is key. We usually spend about 60% of our time in the requirements gathering phase. We have found that spending that time up front is going to make the project run smoother and actually reduce the overall time for the project. So the first step that you're going to need to do is the high-level requirements. You need to understand where your data is coming from, and you need to understand the destination org. If your data is coming from another system, I like to get a login to that system so that I can take a look at the data in its native context. You need to understand the destination org. Is that a brand new org, or are you migrating data into an existing org? You will have separately had the conversation about data and security model, but you should understand what objects you're migrating the data into. The next step is going to be data review. Now, when I first started doing data migration projects, I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but this is going to be the one time, the one chance that you have to get clean data into the new org. So it's good to spend that time up front taking a look at the data. What I normally do is I extract the data into an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database, and then I have the client take a first pass at looking at the data in the fields. They can use a tool like Field Trip or Elements Cloud to review how the fields are used in their org, and invariably they identify fields that we don't even need to migrate. So it's good to have them take a first look at the fields. then I spend my time reviewing the data field by field. And what I'm looking for when I'm doing that are opportunities to normalize the data, and also I'm looking for exceptions. Opportunities to normalize the data might be a text field that's going to have different spellings and abbreviations of the same value. So that's a great opportunity to make that a pick list field, normalize the data, it helps with reporting, so you're gonna try to identify those opportunities. Additionally, everyone sees this a lot, there's gonna be a text field, and it's gonna have a phone number or it's gonna have an email in it. And when you're running your data migration, that's gonna end up being an exception. So it's really good to deal with those exceptions up front. So you have three options to deal with the exceptions. You can either have the client clean up the data before you do the migration. You can address the exception and make a note for the developer to ignore that value when they're doing the migration if it doesn't meet the field type. Or the option that's not the best is have an exception report at the end of the migration. So I spent a lot of time dealing with those exceptions up front, and then making a note at the top of my data review spreadsheet of my thoughts on each of the fields. Then I take the time to review that with the client in detail, so we're all on the same page. The next point is a mapping document. So this is where I'm going to find a home for all of the data that I've now reviewed, all of the fields. So I have a spreadsheet with tabs for each of the objects, and I extract the fields from the destination object into the Excel spreadsheet, noting the field type and the API name for the developer. And that's going to help me because I'm looking at my data review spreadsheet, and I'm finding a home for each one. But again, as I'm doing that and I'm finding a home for it, I'm, again, looking for exceptions. They really come up a lot. And I have a comments section where I'm making any notes to the developer. Again, things like pick list field mappings, where your source org may have a pick list and you have a different pick list in your destination org. You know, what's that mapping look like? I'm noting that on this mapping spreadsheet. Any exceptions for how we're going to deal with those exceptions, and then also any default values that we need to deal with. So I spent a lot of time making those notes on this spreadsheet for the developer. And once again, this is a recurring theme. I'm reviewing that with the client again to make sure we're all on the same page. That's really important. The next, it's a lot of paperwork here, but the next item is a data contract. We've always done data contracts, but over time, they become a lot more detailed. The data contract is going to encompass the entire scope of your project. It's got all the details in it, so everybody knows what's happening, both the client and development. So it's going to include things like your source and destination, which objects are involved, but most importantly is what data are you migrating? Are you just migrating all of the data out of that source org? Or are you migrating things from a certain time frame, a certain status, a certain owner? So that gets the client thinking, because a lot of times they just want to bring in all the data and you have storage issues. So you get them to think about what data do you really want to bring over? And then you're making note of that in the data contract. And then once again, recurring theme, reviewing that with the client in detail. Two other items that we handle are what we call configuration data. That's the data that's going to be referenced by multiple records in your migration. Obvious example of that are user records. Maybe you have a set of campaigns that you need to set as a lookup. We've had custom objects of banks that we need to set up. So you need to have a plan for how that's going to get into the sandbox and then also into production before you're running your migration. Lisa and I had an experience where we were running an enterprise-level data migration over a weekend. We started the migration script, and about halfway through, we realized we forgot to import the configuration data. So we had to back everything out and rerun that script. So that was
a very long weekend.
Yes. Yeah. So we make note of that now, and we make sure that we have a plan to deal with it. And then the last item is, what is the order you're going to migrate the objects in? It's necessary to define the sequence of your migration so that you're setting up the lookup values and the relationships appropriately. So you need to think about that up front. And also, it's good information for development. So once you've gone through all of this paperwork and exception handling and reviewing it with the client about 10 times, you're all on the same page, you now have a data contract with the mapping document. But the one note I'd like to make about that, and something I've started to do over time, is even though the client is signing that document and saying, okay, here's the scope of our project, along the way you're gonna find things you forgot to deal with, the client's gonna have change orders, development's gonna have questions, and so for me, this is a living document. As we're going through development, QA, UAT, I'm making notes on these documents about any of the adjustments we've made, and also the date and why we're making that adjustment, so that by the time we get to QA, we have a solid plan for testing that's all up to date with any of the changes that we've made. So now that we've gone through this, we have the package of the data contract and the mapping. It's well-defined, I've got all my exceptions, everyone agrees to what we're doing, and that's when I hand it over to Lisa in order to execute the migration.
Thanks, Janet. Now that we have the requirements detailed, our job as developers is to actually make the migration happen. In order to do that, we need to choose the appropriate tool. So what are our options? Apex Data Loader can be used to import data into Salesforce, and the field mapping for each object can be saved in order to make the process a little bit more repeatable. We've used the data loader for both large and small data migrations. Small migrations have been relatively successful. Large migrations end up being a whole lot of work and stress during the go live. And regardless, it's a primarily manual process. Another option is to build your own solution in the programming language of your choice. With this option, you do need to either find or develop tools and methods that can connect and retrieve the source data, parse and transform that data, and then connect and push that data into Salesforce. Long story short, this ends up being a lot of development up front prior to testing and the eventual go live. These two are at opposite ends of the repeatability spectrum. So is there something that falls somewhere in the middle? Of course there is. Talon Open Studio is an open source integrated development environment, IDE. It's built on top of the Eclipse IDE. It can be used for ETL projects like data migrations. The logic is controlled by arranging a series of modules that each complete a discrete task, like connecting to a database or joining data from two sources to map to the destination. Properties files and context variables within the job can be used to control environment-specific information, like the login credentials for the sandbox org or the database connection information. Some modules allow customization of the underlying Java code, and that's helpful for complex logic like pick list mapping that Janet was talking about, or conditionally creating records based on some sort of criteria. There are also built-in modules that can connect to everything standalone databases, CRMs, including Salesforce, SFTP servers, and local and network file systems. Those modules usually only require the connection information, like a JDBC URL or the Salesforce authentication information. At the end of the day, the data migration looks similar to a flowchart, and Talon converts that flowchart into an executable Java app. Before the demo, I want to review the contents of the Git repository that will be provided. This includes the data contract and mapping document, a sample of those that Janet discussed, as well as the directory structure expected by the Talon job and the Talon job elements themselves. The directory structure includes a directory for each environment, in my case, production and sandbox. Each of those folders contains a subfolder for the output. And this is where all of the migrated data is stored, usually in CSV form, as well as a CSV that contains the data prior to being migrated into the destination org. Each of those environment folders also contains a Talon properties file, and this is where that environment-specific information goes, like your Salesforce credentials and your connection information for the source data. The Talon job elements are stored in the Talon job folder in the repository. There are 4 separate jobs. The first job is named Command Center, and that job controls reading in the environment variables for the appropriate environment, and then controlling the order in which the objects are upserted. The next job is Destination Pull Common Records, and that retrieves that configuration data that Janet was talking about. In the case of this sample, it's users, and we use that data to be able to set the created by and owner IDs on both the contacts and the accounts. The next job is Migrate Accounts, and that job, in my case, the source org is also a Salesforce org. So the Migrate Accounts job connects to the source Salesforce org. It retrieves all of the accounts, maps those to be in format with the destination org, and then upserts those records into the destination org. The Migrate Contacts job does the same thing with contacts, and it also sets the lookup for the appropriate account. All right, now that we've gone through all of that, let's see a demo. Cool. All right, so make sure I'm still logged in. Excellent. Okay, this org on the left is my source org. You can see the S in the cloud there indicating that this is the source. This org over here is the destination org, represented by the D. This report is the same in both orgs. It's a report of contacts grouped by their account. And when I refresh, you can see that there are 20 contact records in this org, and there are 0 contact records in this org. So this is the Talon job. This is that command center job that kind of controls the flow of everything. I'm going to start it compiling here because that takes a minute. And while I do that, the first thing it's going to do, it's going to start here where it says start here. And then it's going to read in those environment-specific variables. It's already done that. You can see right above the line, it says 10 rows. Hopefully you can see that. It's kind of small. Now that it's completed that, it moves to pulling that configuration data from the destination org. This is the user records, and it's pulling down the ID in the destination org and the external ID, which was set to the ID from the source org in order to tie them together. Once this job's done, we're going to see a little green OK show up above this line. There it is, right on cue. Thank you. Now it's going to move to the Migrate Accounts job. And what this job is doing, it's going to export the accounts from the source org. These exports are doing a bulk query. So it is retrieving, it can retrieve a large number of records. Once it's finished retrieving them, it's going to go through and do that transformation. In this sample, the transformation is pretty straightforward. The fields are the same in both orgs. This is, kind of an example of how it will work, and it can get a lot more complicated. So these debug statements here are saying that we found 12 accounts in the source org. We're creating 12 accounts in the destination org. We had 0 fail and 12 succeed. We retry, but since there aren't any that failed, there's nothing to retry. Now there's a little OK here showing that it's moved on to the contacts job. The contacts job has a little bit more work to do. It's exporting the contacts from the source org, and it's also exporting the accounts from the destination org so that it can set that relationship appropriately. This one takes just a little bit longer to run. So while we're waiting for it, how many people have heard of Talon or used Talon before? Fair number. My coworkers have. That's good news. Has anybody used Talon in this way to do data migration or transform data? Cool. All right, good. That was perfect. So now we found 20 records of contacts, and we're turning those into 20 records in the destination org. The first pass, there were 2 contacts that failed and 18 that succeeded. Those 2 failures have invalid email addresses. And so when we retry, we clear out that email address field and we leave the rest of the data intact. And then you can see that they were successful on the retry. All right, the job is done. So let's go back to our source and destination orgs. And I'm going to refresh the source just to make sure. And then when we refresh the destination org, there's 20 contacts grouped by their accounts. You can see that the data between the 2 is the same. Oh, it worked. All right. So now that we've seen that it works, I'm going to dig in a little bit more to the kind of meat of the Talon jobs. I'm going to open the migrate contacts job, and I'm going to move that out of the way so that we can see what we're doing here. Oops, up. Okay. So again, it starts here, and the first thing it does is it creates a Salesforce connection to the source org and the destination org. These modules can perform any Java code that you want. In my job, they're pretty much used just to print out those debug statements so that we know what the job is doing at each step. It will pull the contacts out of the source org. This is a bulk query module. Oh, that's not what I wanted you to do. And then it is also pulling the accounts out of the destination org. This is another bulk query module. It's writing each of those to a CSV file. Once those things have completed, it'll start this next step of the job. It takes that CSV file that was exported, and we're going to, these rows here are going to be executed once for each row in the CSV. So that's basically once for each record. Each of these little arrow guys are joining the data from the exported contacts, and in this case, the exported user file. I'm going to reopen that little, oh, come on. Oh, right, I got to zoom back out in order to be able to click on the box. Oh, that's not where I want you to be. Okay. So this one is trying to set the created by ID. And what it's doing is it's taking the created by ID from the contact record in the source org, and it's trying to match it with the external ID field in the user export that came out of the destination field. This is how we're matching those 2 things together. Once it does that, if it finds a match, it sets the ID value of the user record in the destination org to the created by, to a new variable in our row here that's going across. We do the same thing for the owner ID, and with the account ID, we do the same thing, except we're using the account export from the destinations. Once all of those joins have happened, we are mapping the fields. This is basically the inside of a for loop. It gets executed once for each row. So we're mapping the input row is the fields from the source environment, and the output row are the fields in the destination environment. We're setting the ID from the source as the external ID. We're setting our ones that we used the join to the values that we found, and the rest of them are just one-to-one mapping, last name to last name, et cetera. We write all of this data to a CSV file, and then we spit out some debug statements saying that we're about to perform the DML. We're using a bulk execute here, and this is basically doing the same thing that data loader would do if you chose upsert. We set all the same values. We set the file that we're using. We're telling it what field to match on, what object, and then the fields are set up in the schema. This results in 2 separate files, one of successes and one of failures. The successes contain the IDs of the records that were inserted, and the failures contain the error message. Then we're going to run through those failures and try to fix any exceptions we find. And this is where, based on the error message, we will clear out the email field if the error was that it was an invalid email address. The rest of the fields are one-to-one mapping. And then we do the same bulk upsert again. with the retry file, and then we spit out the final results. I will show you the variables where the environment-specific information gets stored. We set up a different kind of variable group for each environment, and we tell that group where its properties and output folder are. So this is matching to those directories in the GitHub repository. The 10 values that got populated here are these ones that are blank in this view right here. We have the source credentials for the source org. We have the credentials for the destination org. And then I include the date string and the date time string formatting because Salesforce is a little picky about that. These variables, these are called context variables, and they're shared between all of the jobs. All of the jobs pull in these exact same variables with the same names, and they're passed from this command center job into each of these additional subjobs. I think that's what I've got.
Okay.
All right. So let's go back to the presentation. Hopefully, perfect.
So now that we've taken a look at our requirements gathering milestones, and Lisa's been able to do the demo, we want to give you some high-level takeaways from our experience. So the importance of good requirements, I'm going to harp on that over and over and over. We log all of our project time, and over the time that we've done data migrations, we've seen a demonstrable decrease in the amount of project time, as well as the UAT time and QA time when we've developed good requirements up front, we've dealt with the exceptions, and we've reviewed that in detail with the client. So I just really want to emphasize that. Whether you're gathering those requirements or you're getting them from somebody else, your expectation should be that all of these things have been addressed. And that's just going to make it easier for you.
This tool allows us to distribute the effort of a data migration. With Data Loader, the effort is almost entirely focused on that go-live transition, whether it's over a weekend or after hours. With this process, the developer spends time building this job and mapping the fields based on the requirements that were gathered, and it allows us to spend some time up front, whether that's weeks or months leading up to the migration, and then it does make the whole process take less time overall. The Talon job is also repeatable. If I wanted to, I could go in, run the Talon job again, and it would do exactly the same thing that it just did. And that's very helpful.
That's awesome. As a project manager, what I love about it is this repeatability. You all know that if you're doing a data migration project, you don't gather all the requirements up front, and everything goes smoothly, and bam, at the end you have your migrated data. It's an iterative process. You're going to have change orders. You're going to have things that you missed. So being able to note those, hand those over to development, and have them rerun this process, this repeatable process that's not as manual, it ends up producing the UAT findings because you've been able to address those and rerun it so many times. You get to UAT, you have a few findings, and you're good to go. This also leads to increased confidence in go live. We've probably all had the experience of a go live weekend. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. Your client's going live on Monday with a new org or new data in their org. They have business processes to do, so you're a little bit stressed over that weekend. But we have solid confidence when we get to that go live weekend that things are going to go smoothly because we've gone through this process so many times.
And it's predictable.
Yes, and it's a predictable outcome, so that's why we have confidence. And then the other thing is less fallout the week or two after migration. We've had situations where things haven't gone right, and we're having to make adjustments during that go live week. But with this process, we definitely find that we have less fallout overall. So now we wanted to open it up if anybody had any questions, either project management or technical. I don't know if we have a microphone.
We do. We've got a microphone right there in the
right there.
in the aisle
probably
there.
Hear you, or there's a microphone right there.
I used Talon for several years. I migrated thousands of records, $1.7 million in assets and whatnot. I've used the free version of it so far. With the first thing that you get on Talon website, there are multiple downloads of various. So can you speak to which download would fit your model? There's the integration data and there's the big data migration. And with that, which one, how could you decide which one would fit your business or what are you trying to accomplish here? Can you speak a little to that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have used the data integration version of Talon for pretty much all of our data migrations. I know that I looked into the big data originally, and it wasn't working for the other things we were trying to use it for, and it's easier for us to just kind of use the same tool across the board. And the data integration is the version that we've used going forward. So I don't have a lot of experience with the big data. I have been able to migrate millions of records with the data integration version.
So my question is along the data integration version as well. I'm just curious what the experience is like taking what you've built in Talon and hosting it maybe somewhere else, like in
a
cloud
Heroku
version.
app, perhaps. We do that
yes.
as well. We have some jobs that our clients need to upload an Excel file every month, and we have a job that's built in Talon that does something similar. It parses the data out of those files. We have a page in each org that links to that Heroku job, and the Heroku job accepts those environment variables similar to what the properties file would give, and then it runs the job and it pushes that data back into Salesforce. So we've used it for that as well. We use Node on our Heroku app, and then we also have a worker app that's Java, where it's actually executing the built Java job.
And there was another question over here. Did you have a question?
Yeah, it looked from the presentation that Talon was a tool specifically for Salesforce to Salesforce migrations. Is that right?
So that's my example, but no, it can be used for anything. It has connectors for databases. We've used it to migrate from our internal, privately built database. We've used it to migrate from other CRMs, all those kinds of things. There's modules inside Talon that can connect to each of those things, which is one of the reasons that it makes it such a powerful tool.
With the integration version, I haven't used big data, but I provide software query, like literally you do that with the integration part?
Yeah, the Salesforce bulk query and the regular query ones, they have an option for you to manually input your query and be able to type it in. Yep.
End-to-end, how long does one of these projects take? Say migrating one CRM, like O365 into a Salesforce?
So it definitely depends on how many objects you're migrating. Each job, for each of those, so like the migrate accounts job or the migrate contact job, each of those I usually estimate about 4 to 6 hours for, unless there's a lot of complexity, a lot of pick list mapping, or a lot of other kinds of things that need to be handled. And that's, and then sometimes there's stuff that's really straightforward that's only gonna, I can literally just copy this one over and change a couple field names. So then those don't take quite as long.
So, this is a really simplistic
Right.
example, obviously.
How does the actual press the button go on like the 20 weeks for going through your entire trail?
Oh, requirements gathering and all that? Really depends on the client, how cooperative they are.
And how much they know the data.
Gosh.
It's not even necessarily cooperation.
At least
They
a
have
couple of
to-
months, but we've had ones. Again, it's just the iterative process with the client, and you can maybe speak to once I give you the requirements. But that requirements gathering, I've had to take months of going back and forth with the client or whatever. So we've seen projects take a year. At least 3 to 4 months for like a sort of simple one, just to go
And
through all that.
that's if the people are doing other things too, right? If this is
Yeah.
internal and you have a team that this is the only thing they're doing, obviously that can be condensed. But if you have people who have other jobs that they have to also do at the same time, it takes a little longer.
So if I'm giving you one of our more complex ones and I'm handing over to you all of those requirements, what do you think the hours are on?
So that's where my like 4 to 6,
Not the
sometimes
actual
up to
pushing
10.
of the button, but the
right.
mapping.
No, the actual building the job itself, like 4 to 6, maybe 10 on very complex
That's per
mapping. That's
object.
for each job. Yeah, for each object.
Okay. So it just depends on how many you're involved.
Do you use staging A? If in your example looks like you migrate data from Salesforce to Salesforce. Let's say that you have application, source application, which have a more complex customer model, like EBS, Oracle EBS, PCA, and you need to migrate data into Salesforce. So my first question is, do you use staging area for this process? First. Second question is, I didn't see in your presentation, do you build logical model which is in between of logical model in source system and target system? Because I don't know how to map without having this.
Right. So the first question, yes, one of the things we do is we start this by running it into our sandbox or our staging environment, and that's how we get that predictability and that confidence in the job.
I'm not asking about staging environment.
Okay.
Talking from the source. Yeah.
I'm asking about staging area, where you have set of the tables
Okay.
or whatever containers for the data, where you move your data, where you, based on your extraction rules, then you mentioned exclusion rules, yes, you apply there, then you can have, based on requirements, transformation rules, you apply there, and you have whole picture, stage by stage, in your staging area, okay?
Right. Okay.
You have duplication, you can have enrichment rules, you apply there, and when you are ready, you migrate data into targets. It's my question, do you
We haven't done that in quite granular of a fashion. We usually do it kind of similar to how this is, where we start with the source data. We do whatever we need to in the Talon job to meet
Rules
those
of that-
exclusion rules and
transformations,
the
the
transformations. All of that we usually do in one job. When I'm actually developing the job, sometimes I break that job up and spit out a file so that I can see that it's doing what it's supposed to do correctly, but we haven't actually broken those things out so that we can see each step to verify that each step is happening correctly.
Yeah, but you just mentioned fallout at release, yes? And obviously, after release, users will have millions of questions, why I see this data, or opposite, why I don't see
Yep.
it. Having staging area, and you can see whole picture how data being transformed
Yeah.
to the final stage,
Yeah.
you can answer any question.
Well,
That would
it's
be a much
interesting. I'm
better
just
way
gonna-
to do it.
Well, and I'm just going to jump in because I'm like the requirements, like you can tell I'm into requirements. They're very detailed. So the initial question usually comes to me as the project manager, and I'm reviewing the requirements because Lisa and I have worked together long enough that I know she's doing what I've said in the requirements. And so I'm looking in the requirements to find out maybe where we had a piece of logic or something that why they're seeing what they're seeing. So I start there, and 80% of the time I can see in my requirements why they have the outcome they do. And if I don't, then I can ask Lisa, and then she's looking at the logic in the Talon job to understand maybe there was a small mistake, or maybe we just need to make an adjustment in the logic.
Right, and
So
I'm
we
also
have pretty
looking
good-
at those files that I've spit out, the migrated or the exported data, and then the file that we generate prior to pushing up. Sometimes they're in those exception files, sometimes it's something that we've missed,
Yeah.
or it's just the client misunderstanding the requirements.
But we've had a pretty good success with, I mean, we're always able to figure this out with not a lot of trouble. There's
Right.
kind of breadcrumbs to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, and last thing, it's not a question, just to conclude, it's my observation and my thought, that data migration is never ever about migration of the data. Data migration is about migrating business entities. Why it's important to understand? Because business entities, having business entities implies you have business processes. Business
Agreed.
entities
Right. Right.
Right.
or other type of business entity.
Yeah.
And it's first question which he asked, and then we can filter out what will go to the target system,
Yes.
will not go, and after that, you see what processes are around these business entities, because it will be not good if you migrate these business entities with all data into target,
Yes.
and you lost the processes.
Totally.
Now everything works incorrectly.
Yeah.
Right.
You migrate it correctly.
Yes. That's why project managers are awesome.
It's never ever migration of the data.
Right.
Right.
Migration of business entities.
Definitely. I just want to catch, I think there was one more question, real quick, before they kick us out.
So,
Yeah. Yep. No problem. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.